All right, it is 6:05. I'm going to stop sharing that so I can see everyone. And welcome everyone to our conversation about the state of education for Black students in honor of Black History Month, which for me is every month. So I'm excited to talk to some of the foremost instructors in teacher prep about some things that really concern students, Black students in schools today. I was looking at Black Lives Matter at School's website, and some of the topics that we're going to talk about today are ones that they focused on during their week-long celebration of Black students. So I'm excited to hear varying perspectives on it. I will take a moment to ask the panelists who will be joining in the discussion with me to introduce themselves, tell us a little bit about yourselves before we jump right into dialogue. Let's start with Kelly. Kelly, do you want to start by telling us a little bit about yourself?
Okay. Hi, everybody. We just saw each other like an hour ago. So I hope you guys have rested and had a couple of bites to eat between then and now. Of course, it is encouraging to know that National Louis is taking a moment out of our busy day to pay tribute to Black history, which is American history, which happens every day in all of our lives. So I do want to throw that shout out to 365 Black history. And I'm an adjunct at National Louis. I've been here for quite some years. I've taught everything from math, science, special ed, you name it. My degrees are in elementary education and credentials in math and science. And as I was telling Keisha, I'm done with my dissertation in science ed. So that's the hugest thing that's happening in my life right now. Waiting for that final defense date so that I can check that off my bucket list. But other than that, I'm just very, very passionate about learning for children of all races, but specifically children who are usually left out of classroom narratives and textbooks, and their culture is removed from their daily classroom experience. And oftentimes in this Black History Month, those children are Black. And I use the term Black instead of African American because we know that Africans span the diaspora, and so Blackness for me includes my ancestors from other parts of this world and not just America. Although I definitely acknowledge that the African American existence here in America has particular importance to us who live here. And that's all I have to say. I'm going to keep sipping my tea.
Thank you. You said it. You said in that. Let's go over now to Larue. Larue, would you please take some time to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Good evening, everyone. My name is Larue Fitch, also an adjunct professor here at National Louis University, also an educational consultant, middle school ELA teacher. Prior to this year, former administrator for the last 5 years, currently into the doctoral process. So big ups to Kelly, congratulations. But I'm at the foundational level. Um, Really excited to enter into the space with everybody this evening, just to have that productive conversation about around curriculum, being reflective, culturally responsiveness, all of these areas on just Black History Month. And I do agree that is a focus area for 365 days out the year, not just a month. So I look to gain insight and knowledge from everyone on this panel. Also, just to become reflective and keep driving the force. Because as I said, we want to ensure that this happens outside of February and is embedded into the curriculum as we as adjunct professors here, right, instill these core values and challenge these mindsets within our teacher candidates so they can see the importance of welcoming and being reflective when we talk about diversity and inclusion in the classroom, and how does that look? So I'm really excited. I appreciate this opportunity, and I am just thrilled to be a student this evening.
Thank you so much. All right, Walter, you're up.
I am up. Good evening. I'm Walter Taylor. I am also an adjunct professor at National Louis University, but I also am the Director of Professional Development for the Chicago Teachers Union Foundation. I've been in education my entire career for 25 years, and I am also very interested and looking forward to this conversation.
Thank you. And my name is Keisha Rembert. I am an assistant professor in the teacher prep program here at National Louis. I'll always be a middle school teacher. I'm a forever middle school teacher. I taught US history and English language arts in Chicagoland for a number of years. I'm not as good as Walter. I ain't telling y'all how long. And really grew and loved the teaching profession. Although I started to dabble in the policy world, and what that did was it really inspired me to talk about the complexities of teaching from a teacher perspective. Oftentimes, the people that talk about teaching and make policies for teachers are not in the classroom. And so, when I dabbled into the world of policy, I really started to investigate the recruitment and retention of teachers of color. And that really became something I became really fascinated with. And I thought teaching in Naperville is not gonna lead me to really making a dent in what I'm really passionate about. So it made absolute sense to come to National Louis, which is a Hispanic serving institution, but really is steeped in equity for all students, to ensure that we got the quality of teachers in the classroom that our students deserve throughout the state of Illinois. So let's start this dialogue. It's an intimate group today, so please feel free to use the chat and also vocalize. I think it's intimate enough that if you want to unmute yourself and ask a question or insert an idea, we are all up for that. And I like Larue's, we're here to learn from each other. This is a learning space, a continued learning space. So we had some topics that we're going to talk about. So I'm just going to throw out this first topic for us, which is something that I think a lot of you talked about in your intro, just curriculum representation. And so how has identity been represented in curriculums that you've encountered as teachers? Where do Black students find themselves in curriculum? And how do we ensure that every student is represented, but specifically our Black students in early childhood through elementary education classrooms? And I'll throw that out to whoever wants to volley that one first.
Well, I'll just jump in because I'm not a fan of the wait time in the classroom. I just have to be honest with that. So as a science teacher, places where I have seen cultural relevance, race outside of the predominant race, but Black representation, Latino representation, other kinds of representation tends to show up in biographies. So if I consider the science that I have taught, there is always a section or a highlight or a spotlight on a Black scientist. So for example, when Hidden Figures became very popular, we started to look more at the contributions of Black women in science and math and computer science. So predominantly that's where I have seen it, residing in a biography space, almost in a history space. But there has been difficulty translating that to a science content space or a math content space. And that's pretty much what I've seen. Also, I have done work with trying to recruit mentors for undergraduates in STEM careers who the mentors are, share the same kind of cultural experience as they do. So in my other life outside of National Louis, I work with underrepresented minorities in STEM. And it's always challenging for me to find mentors who are Latinx and Black in the STEM professions to mentor my undergraduates. And I speak to that because, back to the curricular issue, the representation matters in order to build this identity as a person of science or a person of math that happens in early childhood and elementary grades. So I guess I see, on one hand, there is an increase in biographies. It's not where it should be, but I also see that there are efforts to add more diversity in things like picture books. For example, Hidden Figures was written into a picture book. Ada Twist Scientist, CC Love Science. Like, these are just some of the picture books that highlight African American characters.
You mentioned something I just want to follow up on. You talked about, so those ancillary kind of biography texts having Black representation, but it not being embedded necessarily in content. What would that look like?
So, for example, I'm actually working on this project with a high school right now. We're kind of volleying around some ideas about a virtual STEM after school program now that we are in COVID. And one of the concepts that I want to bring to that is to embed cultural awareness in the curricula. For example, we teach about the properties of metals. Okay, so metals, they're malleable, they conduct heat in certain ways depending on which metal they are or which they are not. They rust or they don't rust depending on what they are. So these aspects of metals are predominant in our physical science curricula. Why not take a look at the way Black students are using metals in their lives and use that as the seed to understand the behavior and the characteristics of metals? So, for example, we were talking about hair. So there is a lot of flat ironing, there's, using curling irons. These are metals. And now the beauty industry is advertising certain metals that work better to straighten your hair or to curl your hair with heat. So why is that? What are the characteristics of those metals? Why are they chosen to be used in our flat irons and in our curling irons? So again, then having a conversation with students about their daily lives. What do you do from morning to night? Just kind of list out the things that you're doing. And then let's see which of those things that you do are very indicative of your culture. And let's look deeper into the science that surrounds those things. I was also having a conversation earlier today about the physics of jumping double dutch. So there are many ways that we can kind of embed the cultural relevance and the cultural experience of Black students into the science in very meaningful and content-centered ways.
I love that broadening of it, Kelly, because I think it just shows it's part of its identity, right? It's
Yes.
steeped in everything that I do. I was reading earlier today an article about George Washington Carver, and it said, stop putting him in a box with the peanuts. He helped land. He helped the environment. Like,
yes.
it was larger than just peanuts. He developed an economic center, but he also was dealing ecologically with things as well. So broadening the lens overall. Anyone else want to jump in and add to that?
Yeah, I will. I actually want to talk about how, from my own experience, I always look for myself in everything, be it a classroom or what have you. So I didn't actually see a lot of representation for myself when I was a young child, in early childhood and elementary classrooms. This is about 35, yes, I'm giving my age away, 35, 40 years ago. I didn't see myself a lot in those classrooms. However, I did begin to see myself when I got to high school because many of my teachers were African American, were Black, and they made sure that what they put in front of me represented me. I could see myself in the curriculum. And that was a really powerful thing for me. I mean, in many ways, I think that has encouraged me to become a teacher because I saw Black folks like myself teaching, and I thought, I can do that. They look like me. I can do that. And that's not to be understated. That's really powerful and really important. And of course, that goes across all professions, not just teaching. But for me, being an educator, that was extremely important because often, as we just kind of alluded to and talked about, we are either not represented in curriculum, right? Or we're misrepresented, i.e. George Washington Carver, we just talked about that, right? And that's not okay, obviously. But what I have learned is that through my career, I'm able now, because I have a bit of power, if you can call it that, to actually enact, the change that I actually want to see. So I'm able to bring in curriculum that actually represents kind of a rainbow of folks that I know that I didn't, see when I was, in school. Certainly not in my early childhood and elementary, formative years, not at all. And I think that's especially when we need to see it. And unfortunately, it's not there often. Now, of course, today, it's certainly different, but we still have a very long way to go. Now, I will say this, what was really exciting is that, ISB and Keisha and others, I know you know this, just last week, they came out with the culturally responsive teaching and leading standards for all Illinois educators. I mean, I wanted to jump for joy because this is something, in my opinion, that it's a long time overdue, right? It's a long time. So it's very important that we see this. I mean, this is huge. Now, the work to educate folks on these standards is going to be hard because we actually want them to apply the standards, right? With the intent, the purpose, the fidelity necessary to really have them catch root and grow and flourish to benefit all students.
Yeah.
And I just want to jump in and say that I have read research that shows when inclusion, diverse inclusion, is actually practiced, it benefits all students of all races. So, this idea that, as we celebrate Black History Month, that Black history is just for Black people is a myth that we need to deconstruct because it is American history. And when we embrace the totality of our society, we all benefit. It's not just a benefit for Black students, it's a benefit for white students and Asian students and Latin students. It's a benefit for all students who sit in our room. So I think that because we have the responsibility of teaching, we have to embrace and own that ourselves. We have to believe in the power of equity and inclusion in order to communicate those things to our students in the way that Walter is saying that his teachers were models for him.
Yeah. Larue, this is your baby. I know that you really are down for culturally relevant.
I said I'm a student this evening. I'm trying to learn.
I'm not gonna let you be a student, Larue.
No. See,
students have to speak in class. Come on now.
I have to, right. Thank you, Kelly. I love the positions that everyone's taking, the perspectives. I as you said, Keisha, I do a lot of research around here. And the major research is culturally relevant pedagogy. That's my area of focus right now. And I commend, long time coming, definitely concur with what Walter said, long time coming for the state of Illinois. However, my mindset, my belief still stands on until there's a culturally relevant pedagogy approach to this, culturally responsive teaching really doesn't do it all, right? It's a great start. However, I still believe in the research of Dr. Gloria Lamson Billings. And when she talks about 3 areas of teaching, not just Black students, any minority student, right? And the importance of teaching academic success. A lot of our Black kids come with the skill set. They're critical thinkers. They're great, very artistic. It's just the standards and the skills that they don't understand. So it's our responsibility as educators to ensure that we instruct them so they can understand. Also, being knowledgeable, being proficient in your own culture, having some sort of cultural competency about who you are, right? And then last but not least, it's very critical that we teach our Black kids how to be conscious, right? How to have identity, how to challenge the system, societal system that's currently happening, right? We have to teach those 3 areas if we want to shatter all paradigms. And when we talk about curriculum, we are the curriculum, right? I love what we're doing at National Louis. I love the approach with the cultural diversity, method. But we have to realize like our teachers are the curriculum and it's their responsibility. Now we know in most cases, our curriculums come from a Eurocentric background. And a lot of our students, they can't relate to that, right? So then what do we do in that situation? It is the job, the sole responsibility of our educators to adjust and modify that curriculum to meet the needs of every single kid that's in your classroom. If there's no connection, there's no engagement. In a lot of cases, a lot of our Black kids are acting and trying to do school, and they have not absorbed how to really endorse it through collaborative conversation, through Socratic seminar, right? We have to allow them to flourish, but they must focus on those 3 areas. We must shatter paradigms. And as educators, we have to realize that we are the responsible ones. We are the curriculum. We need to know our students, build those relationships, and we need to teach our students how to think. And we need not to teach them on what to think, right? Just provide them with the essential tools and they'll be able to flourish. So that's where I stand with that when we talk about the curriculum.
I'm so glad that you mentioned that idea, because I think when people just hear culturally relevant teaching or culturally sustaining pedagogies, they only think of a face in a book, and they don't think about anti-racist teaching. Culturally responsive teaching is critical thinking. It is how to dissect rhetoric. So if I'm a Black student and I'm looking on the news every day and the media is portraying me the same way over and over again, a culturally responsive teaching is teaching me how to dissect that rhetoric and know that that's not me, that is just rhetoric, and to be able to do that critical thinking that you talked about, Larue. So thank you for bringing that to light too. I was just there's a couple of books in the chat, and they're really good books, students, to ground you in understanding of culturally relevant and responsive teaching. Really good stuff. I'm going to introduce really quickly because Kimberlee is in the house. So Kimberlee, do you want to jump in and introduce yourself? I know that you're on a phone and I know it's a little difficult, but I wanted to make sure that I acknowledge that you are here. Uh-oh. And technology, and we all know how Zoom is. And I was making sure I wasn't on mute while I was talking, so not on mute. So
True.
that's good. But we'll come back to Kimberlee because she's probably having some tech difficulties. Something a lot of you talked about was this idea of even staff representation, and I talked about it. That's something that I'm really passionate about having Black teachers in front of Black students. 80% of educators in the United States are women, and are white, and most of those educators are women, while in public schools, 52% of students are students of color. And so what does it mean to have, and how do we experience the profession differently than potentially our white peers, and what does that mean for a student? I know, Walter, you spoke to that a little bit. Can you remember your first teacher of color and what that meant to you?
I certainly can remember my first teacher of color. I remember her name and everything. Even though I'm a little, seasoned, I still remember from way back when, right? But that was a profound impact. I really looked at her. Miss Pope was her name. Mrs. Pope was her name. I looked at her as like my mother. This was second grade. And third grade, actually, third grade. And I looked at her like a mother figure, which really made me extremely comfortable. And which also was very important because we had just moved from an area to another area. And so this was a new school for me. And for that to be the first teacher that I would have in this new school really helped, me transition well. I mean, it's when you stop and you think about these things, you're like, wow, that's really important. But people don't stop and think about these things, unfortunately. But I will say that the teacher that had the greatest impact on me was my music teacher in high school, Mr. Gans. And to this day, we still keep in contact. It- Ironically, we shared the same birthday, which is, I mean, just phenomenal. But he really encouraged me to pursue my teaching career and also my singing as well, because I sing. And we need people like that who can push us in the directions that we certainly can go in. For me, it was education. And again, we're talking 25 years later, and I still have a meaningful relationship with this person. And he still is someone that I look to for advice, and vice versa now, right? So I mean, it's profoundly important. And I have to say, in Chicago, there used to be a plethora of Black female teachers in Chicago public schools. That has now changed. In the last 10 years, it's completely changed. And I know for a fact that has had not a positive effect on the students of color who make up the majority of the folks who attend public school.
I'd like to really trudge into that exodus because, like, why do you all think that people are leaving the profession or not entering the profession?
Well, I'd like to say just generally for teachers of all races, retention is low. We've read the studies that say teachers usually move in and out of the profession anywhere between 3 and 5 years after entering it, regardless of their race. So, how does that break down demographically? I'm not sure. But I think that we already had a problem in education with keeping our best and brightest teachers. And we know that education is one of those areas that predominantly serves women and children. And I just like to say, when in the history of the world have women and children been prioritized? So it seems to be consistent with what happens in the world anyway. Not to say that that makes it acceptable for us, but I think that investigating that exodus begins with just looking at the conditions around respect for women and children initially, and then extrapolating that out to different demographics.
That is so true. And I just wanted to comment, from the union perspective, because I do work for the union, we have seen the numbers, right? And Black women teachers have left the profession for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons they certainly have left is that, to be blunt, treatment. A lot of the way that Black women teachers have been treated in Chicago public schools and other places too, has caused them to retire, number one, early, many of them, but also not encourage their family members, because that used to be a thing, like if you had a teacher in the family, everybody wanted to be a teacher. I mean, that's just how it went, right? Literally on one side of my family, I can count probably 30 teachers back in the day. Now, probably I can count on one hand how many teachers there are in my family, including myself. So I think a lot of it has to do with the treatment that many teachers receive, Black female teachers in general. But then for Black men, the numbers are even more, low, right? They're not nearly as high. And that's for lots of reasons too, because a lot of men don't go into the profession, especially at the elementary level and the middle school level, which is where I taught at the middle school level, because they don't want to put up with what they call the BS, to keep it real, right? And so they just don't enter into the profession, which is why I have partnered with an organization called Profound Gentlemen. It's a Black organization run by Black men out of Charlotte, North Carolina. But however, they have outreach to places like Atlanta, Chicago, and we're helping them to grow, because I know personally the importance of having to see a Black male teacher in front of you as a Black male really makes a difference, and it matters.
I want to speak to the work environment, because I am one of those Black women who was a science teacher and a math teacher, areas that we keep hearing about being in demand. And I left CPS after teaching there for a very, very long time. And one of the reasons that I left was the just very toxic work environment. I'll share this story briefly. I have two sons. Our house was broken into. My son was at home. My oldest son was at home. Both of my sons were Chicago Public School students. So he's a Chicago Public School student. He's in the house when this guy breaks in. This guy, thank God, didn't hurt him, but definitely scared him and threatened to kill him and stole many things in our house. My lesson plans were due. This happened on Good Friday. We had been on break for spring break. And then my lesson plans were due on Monday. So Monday morning, I come into work. I write a note to my principal and say, I don't have my lesson plans. My house was broken into. My computers were stolen. My son was there. So it was a very traumatic event for us. And I asked her if I could have an extension on my lesson plan. Within maybe 2 hours, she came to my 7th grade math class, interrupted class, to serve me with a disciplinary warning about not turning in my lesson plans. It turned into an entire thing. But there is a culture in CPS that empowers some principals to feel like it is their responsibility and their right to determine which professionals can practice the profession they went to school to learn, that they have degrees and experience in. And it is a culture in CPS that definitely discourages Black teachers, because there's so much punishment and scrutinizing around everything that you do. And I feel that this toxic work environment that happens often at CPS starts at the top. We see it in the news when we see the mayor and the teachers union arguing about things, and it filters down. And I remember when CPS's motto was children first. I don't know if it still is their motto, but I would say it every single time I saw it. Children first, unless something else comes up, because it didn't feel like children were prioritized. And I just say that, why are we leaving the profession? Part of it is disrespect. Part of it is an over abundance of punitive actions for minor things.
Kelly, I'll push back. I taught in suburban Chicago. It ain't just CPS.
It's not okay.
CPS. I think it happens. I think it happens globally. And Larue, I want you to talk about this. Being a former administrator, did you see? Was it hard for you to staff Black teachers? What's your view?
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't want to target one specific district. I want to keep it, focused on, I think that a lot of districts have pivoted away from capacity building and have become a center of compliance, right? And that's where the disconnect comes, with a lot of teachers feeling that they're not receiving that adequate feedback or that support, as well as it's hard to staff, especially Black men. They really go to the high school level, right? Pay is a big issue, as well as most of my representation growing up. You were either a disciplinarian, or you were a gym teacher, right? And that's all I was accustomed to, in my experience as a kid. So I was able to shatter that paradigm when I became a fourth grade teacher back in 2007. I can say my age. However, as we look currently right now, the numbers are still, as you said, Keisha, 80% of teachers, majority of the teachers are, young white women that are in this profession, teaching 50+% of Black students. And we're still talking about the primary to prison pipeline. We're still talking about Senate Bill 100, restorative practices. We're still talking about catching up. We have now, shifted from the reality of injustices within the curriculum, resources, lack thereof, to more of a, let's give everybody equal access. To now the buzzword is equity. We want to focus on personalized learning. But in order for us to truly get to a level where we are admiring and appreciating diversity and welcoming it and getting the right people in front of our students, we're going to continuously see this happen in education. So in order for us to get to that liberation stage where we can just shatter all paradigms, we need to make sure we have a majority of our teachers that look like the students in which they're servicing. Because if they don't, it's sad to say, but there's no connection, no relationships. The students are not engaged, and we're going to continue this hamster wheel. So it's very critical. And I know that you guys have touched base on just what's going on. They're leaving the profession. I found in my situation, a lot of Black men, they matriculate and become an administrator. And they feel there it is. I don't have to go back into the classroom. And I really feel, that can be a negative approach to it, because our kids, we need to be in the trenches with our kids, right? There's nothing wrong with, someone being promoted and being able to, go there. However, those students need us. Most of our Black kids that are in front of us are experiencing households where they don't know who their father is. Fathers are locked up. It's a lot of grandparents raising the baby. So we are not just teachers, right? We are mentors in that capacity. We are father figures. I'm sure Walter can allude to this. There's countless of kids that came back to me and said, "Man, Mr. Fitch, you remind me of my father." But the sad thing about it, team, is he's never even met his father. So that was deep. That sticks with you, like, wow, you're not just a teacher in there. You're the father. So when you just leave or you're not coming around, it's a problem. Right. So we have to remember that we're more than just gym teachers. We're more than just disciplinarians. We are science teachers. We are math teachers. We are great at what we do, but we have to have a strong lens of recruitment. And I believe, team, my personal belief, it has to start at the high school level, to start grooming our kids now, to getting them ready, targeting them so they can join a program and come to National Louis University and start off there. I believe personally it should start at the high school level.
Well, I'm going to pick apart a couple of things you said, because I'm not sure if I agree with a couple of things. So one is that equity is a buzzword. I think anything that we over talk about could be a buzzword, but I think equity is an action, right? Like, I don't want equity to become something, some watered down thing that we see as buzzword worthy, when it is something really that should be steeped in everything that we talk about and discuss. So what do you mean by equity being kind of a buzzword?
Yeah, I believe personally with some of the injustices that have currently happened and the world is coming to listen, it's all about equity. Let's individualize, let's hear them out, let's get everything. If you're not doing it with intention, if there's no sense of action, which I agree with you, Keisha. If there's no action behind it, then it just becomes a buzzword. We have to see action behind equity. And how does that look? We can't just use the word and then nothing happens and now we're back to square one. Like, remember, this is an equity driven institution. How does it look? And if there's no action behind it, it just becomes a buzzword. So we, the end in mind, right, is to eventually shatter the paradigms and say we're at a point of liberation. But until we close this academic gap, until we support the social emotional learning needs, and our students feel like they are not just they're part of the curriculum and not a part of the curriculum, then no action behind it.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that there's systemic, we have to counteract systemic racism with systemic action.
Absolutely.
And in that, thinking about that systemic action, we have to think about even the terminology we use. So I heard you say the achievement gap. Well, I like to talk about the opportunity gap. So we have in don't talk to me about the achievement gap until you talk to me about the opportunity and the equity gap that exists in schools. So we were, last year, we were all up in arms because somebody paid for their kid to get into some college. Well, we do that we do that in Chicago all the time. People pay for a house to live in a certain area to give their kids access to a certain school. So we want to get mad because people do it in the higher ed level when it's done in Chicago all the time. And I also think that when we talk about, I think Black males have ascended the ranks of teacher leadership because there aren't enough avenues of teacher leadership available. So where do I go? I'm either a teacher in the classroom or I'm an administrator. There should be rungs between that where I can still serve in the capacity of teacher, but also accumulate some wealth. I remember being the equity person in the school. Well, that didn't come with no pay. Like, give me some teacher leadership role that I can remain in the classroom and do what I love, but also I can have more compensation. I can maybe get another title. I think again, it goes back to that kind of those systemic issues that exist. I'm gonna open it up. Does anyone have any, since we're in this intimate space, does anyone have any questions, comments about what we've talked about so far?
Hey, Keisha, it's Kimberlee. I'm sorry I'm en route to the airport, but this has been an amazing conversation, and I'm just glad to be able to join everybody and hear all of these great different perspectives. One thing I want to share just a bit about my own experience. You asked the question about our first experience with an African-American teacher and do we remember it? And, I come from the early childhood perspective, and I think it's not ironic at all that my very first teacher was an African-American woman, my very first preschool teacher when I was 3 years old. And, I will say this, it was very impactful to the point that I do really believe that she is the reason I became a teacher. Not only that, she's the reason I became an early childhood teacher. And, back in the day, our teachers were a part of our community. We maintained, she lived in our neighborhood. She was someone that my mother knew and that everybody in the community knew. Your sister, there was this continuity, of care at one time with teachers in our schools. And I find that doesn't exist any longer. We do see in the early childhood environment, you see that a lot more than you do as you go up the levels. So you see a lot of representation of teachers at those levels, but we know that there are so many compensation and equity gaps there. And it's almost become a part of the culture in the early childhood arena that the expectation is that you won't be paid. And so I think there's so many things that we have to really begin to have conversations about, because if we want to develop those positive mindsets for our children and allow them to see themselves as competent, we really have to begin to change the culture of how we think about teachers in general. And so I just love everything I've heard everybody say, and thanks for letting me jump on here and in the airport.
Thank you. You bring up this point of, I think of patriarchy and that intersection of like what that has done to the field. When we think educators used to be male and they had more respect when they were males. And then when the profession became a female dominant profession, I believe some of that eroded even. And so that's just an interesting dichotomy too.
The irony is also, you speak about growth, for example, Black men going into administrative roles because that's the natural growth trajectory. When I think about my college experience, overwhelmingly it was male. And I took a lot of math and science classes. You know, I was in STEM. And I remember when I had a a woman, she was a white woman for one of my microbiology classes, I was like, oh, it's a woman. You know, I honestly was distracted from learning because I had never had a woman professor in college to teach any of my math and science courses. So I think that it's lopsided. When we get to the more autonomous, higher earning professions in education, that's where we see more men. Then, you know, in definitely early childhood, we don't see them, or, you know, in elementary school. We start to see more in high school and then more in college. And then I also want to speak to Larue's point about the buzzword. So I definitely agree that our goal is action. And it's actually something that as we, you know, come close to ending this call, I want to put front and center on everybody's plate. And that is, what is your action towards a more equitable and diverse and inclusive National Louis? How do you advocate for that kind of equity and diversity and inclusion that we are discussing today? Because it's like, I akin it to the environment. So we who are sitting here did not create the hole in the ozone. We did not create all of the environmental pollutants that exist right now. But we will recycle, you know, we will live an environmentally healthy life in order to help the environment. I feel that same way about institutionalized racism. We who are sitting here did not create this problem. We inherited this problem. However, everybody who is sitting here has a role to play in solving it. In the same way, we all play a role in living environmentally healthy. How do we play a role in living racially healthy? And what are our actions? Because I love the conversation, but I also, I agree with both Keisha and Larue, because sometimes we just see the diversity statement and it ends there, and it is a buzzword. And then other times we have to push and push and push against the machine to get it to move in an equitable way. So we are the machine. What do we do to move equity forward in our university?
I love that. I love that, because that's what it's about. And I see that Keisha put in the chat here, what does it mean to be anti-racist? That's it. It's action. Like, what are you doing? You know, not just what you're talking about, right? Because we all can talk about these things, but actually, what is it that you're putting into practice? And one thing that I can say about National Louis, because I was a student at National Louis for my bachelor's degree. I got my bachelor's degree in elementary education from National Louis. I had a full experience at National Louis. I was one of very few, you know, Black students. I was, but I had a full experience, partially because I think people knew people knew each other. I mean, like I knew the provost of the school. Like I would see her and we would talk. I knew folks and people knew me. And, it really gave a sense of community to the university where even though I was an elementary education major, people knew that I sang and I acted. So they invited me to do things like go to the Evanston campus because I was a Chicago person. Go to the Evanston campus and participate in their musical reviews. And, you really should try out for this, play. And I would because, people thought that, hey, why not? That type of community is really important to establish because it creates, at least for me it created a safe space for me to be who I was and not be afraid of that, even though I was one of very few African Americans, Black folks at the time going to National Louis, that I saw at least.
I like that,
Also have
Walter.
to- I'm sorry.
No, quickly, I like the question, what does it mean to be anti-racist? And we have to do it apologetically. It's having that courageous conversation about race. It starts at the building level, having courageous conversation about race in education. In the classroom, calling it out. There is a study happening in South Africa right now where in their educational system, they have the mindset, the belief that they're going to approach it as an I don't see color. You don't see color as a teacher? Police officers see colors, judges see colors. We have to be able to dialogue and have that conversation. It's not comforting, but it has to happen. We need to talk about social justice issues because our students have a perception in their head. In most cases, team, their perception is their reality, right? And they get a lot of information from secondhand news, social media, and that's their belief. We have a moral responsibility. It's on us to teach them what does it mean to be Black in America? What does it mean to be brown in America? We have to have these courageous conversations so now students feel engaged. Because after you're done instructing them and going through the lesson, once they're able to have that conversation with their friends, they're talking about everything that you should have been talking about or engaging them in the curriculum so we can make that meaningful connection with them. So when I think about anti-racist, it's calling it out. I do see color in the classroom. I do see color within my staff. I have to call that out and be unapologetically about it because at the end of the day, I want to cultivate a culture, some relationships in the building where people feel like, okay, he is woke, right? He knows what's happening because at the end of the day, as we look at data and we analyze it, we know there's a huge achievement gap. And I definitely agree with you, Keisha. There's an opportunity gap, lack of resources, lack of funding, support. There's countless of gaps everywhere. However, we have a responsibility to address racism as it is in order for it to be dismantled. We have to talk about it. We have to ease into that discomfort, but it must happen.
Thank you all. I just want to add this last thing. I think also we have to deconstruct narratives. We have to deconstruct master narratives. So there's a master narrative that Black children are poor. And these are myths, right? Even some of the school to prison pipeline statistics are incorrect. I was just watching a documentary about the crack baby myth and all these myths that are perpetuated about Black and Brown communities being poor communities. I think about my own family. If I look around my own family, and I'm sure the Black people on this call could say, no, we don't all fall into one particular demographic or social demographic. So we have to start teaching Black joy. We have to start teaching Black excellence. We have to show students that you are not relegated to one place and that we are not a monolith. It's not just all Black people in the hood. It's just not, you can only be hood or Michael Jordan. There are spaces
So much in between.
For all of us to exist, and we have to celebrate all of those different existences. And because society doesn't. When we turn on the news, we see a monolith, and we don't see all of the gradations of what it means to be Black, and our students need to see that the time is gone. And I feel like we need a part 2 to talk.
Well, Black History 365, we can advocate for doing this more and outside of just Black History Month.
Yes, I agree. Thank you.
Why not start with ourselves?
I want to say before we end, Keisha, thank you so much for
Yes,
having
thank you.
we
Thank you.
appreciate you so
I
much
appreciate
for
this.
facilitating this. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming and participating. And I'm with 365. So let's make it happen. Let's make it happen. Thank you all so much. And we're going to share this out so that those who couldn't be with us today can partake in the conversation and hopefully evolve the conversation and act. So thank you all for being here.
All right. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.